Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement Podcast with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Have you ever looked in the mirror and said to yourself, I thought I'd be healthier, in better shape, feel better both physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and be further along in my life? If so, come on this journey with my dad as he explores all things health and wellness from a holistic medical perspective, even as a classically trained physician. He'll share integrative strategies to optimize health and inspire you to join the modern medicine movement.
Welcome to the Modern Medicine Movement podcast and a big aloha. Dr. Thomas Hemingway here, and I'm super pumped, super excited, super grateful to be here with you all. Oh my gosh, it's a beautiful day in Hawaii. It's actually my birthday eve. If there was a holiday, right? It's my birthday tomorrow, so I'm pumped. I get to share some health and wellness with you guys coming up, thinking about, my own mortality as I get close to 50 here. And oh my gosh, it's been amazing. I feel great. Have learned so much over the last 20 years in health and wellness and medicine, and more specifically in the last 10 years when I've really focused a lot on health and wellness. And it's exciting. It's exciting looking forward to the future. I'm not in dread like I think sometimes happens. We click over into our 40s and then move over the hump past 45, close to 50, and we kind of think, gosh, man, half of my life is over. And you kind of get a little weird on that, get a little, nostalgic, maybe, you're not in the ideal health that you wish that you were in, and you think, gosh, I can't do the things that I could do back when I was 20 or when I was 30 or when I turned 40 or whatever. And guess what? All that you can, man, all that's crap. You can actually do what you want to do if you take good care of that body you got, because it can do amazing, amazing, amazing things. And I'm living proof of that. I feel better and better with time. Oh, it's just looking forward to the future is exciting. I relish, looking forward and thinking about all the great things that lie ahead with my family, with my children as they grow up, with my work here in medicine and in wellness and sharing with you guys. It's super exciting. I'm pumped up, and I just to begin, I wanted to thank you guys for taking the time out, for listening, for sharing the message. I mean, we've been going just about 2 months or so, maybe a little longer, and we've literally had thousands and thousands of downloads, which is so humbling. It's just so amazing, and I just couldn't be here without you guys. And I'm on this journey with you, and it's just humbling to see your feedback, to see, the value you guys are getting, receiving your comments, both on Facebook, on Instagram, and emails. It's super exciting. So I hope you guys have heard about my new private Facebook group by now. It's called the Modern Medicine Movement Health and Wellness Group. You can search that up. I pretty much approve everyone universally. It's a private group where I'll share additional messages, additional value, additional content. I'll put some lives on there, added posts about health and wellness topics. You guys can interact with me. I'm also at Aloha Surf Doc or at Modern Medicine Movement on Instagram. You can find me also on my website, modernmedicinemovement.com. You can even email me, super easy, Modern Medicine Movement Podcast at gmail.com. I've had several requests come in for topics, and somebody fairly recently asked me to sort of update a little bit on coronavirus, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Not so much the virus itself, but about some, what I like to call unintended consequences, things that have happened, I think, to us over the last few months, and lessons that I've learned, things that I think we can all glean about this time and how we can look to the future, how we can better ourselves, better our health. We're gonna use the positive spin, because why not? I know it's been a weird, interesting time, but there's lessons we can learn. There's things we can do. Why not turn it to the positive and to our advantage, because we can always learn and grow. I've learned that over and over the years, and it's always been humbling to me, and I can't wait to share that with you. And once again, just super pumped to be here. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't left a review on Apple Podcasts yet, please do so. It really, really helps us get the word out. Super easy to do on Apple Podcasts. You just scroll down to where you see the 5 stars. You click on the star farthest to the right, and then just below that, there's a little thing. It's kind of smaller on the left. Underneath that says write a review. Just click on that and give me a shout out. Send some feedback, send some love. Would love to see your comments. I like to share those here. So please, 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 please do that so we can get the message out, because we can affect more people that way. We can share this knowledge, share, this movement, because really that's what I deep down desire for all of us, that we can achieve optimal health of our mind, our body, our soul, our emotions. Hey, we even threw in a financial health podcast last week, which was just chock full of super helpful knowledge and information. Hopefully you've had a chance to take a listen, take notes. If not, go back and listen. So much good information there. And so anyway, without further ado, I'm pumped to share with you more about how we can sort of maximize our lives despite challenges, despite this interesting time that we've been living through over the last several months, because it's changed a lot of things. There's changed so many things around us. Our abilities to kind of be in our normal routines have sort of been turned upside down. But what I've learned is we, despite certain restrictions and things that have been put upon us, we can still actively take part in our own health and wellness. We can optimize the health of our mind, our body, our spirit, our emotions, as we look for the good, look for the noteworthy, look for the lessons that we can learn despite all of this, and make literally each and every day, we can make it our own, and we can use that, to our advantage. And yes, I'll admit, like, even I've been affected in different ways by this pandemic, and it's been a little rough in a lot of ways. I was separated from my family for about 5 weeks or so, and that was pretty rough. And I was going to work every day back here in Hawaii, and there's some interesting things that I've had to witness, and things that are rough, things that are depressing, that aren't really I'll be raw with you. It's been a little rough, and I'm going to share with you. I'm going to get real. I'm going to share with you some of the lessons I've learned, and hopefully I can impart some things that'll be helpful to you guys as well, because I think in times like these, it really, teaches us that we can't just be on sort of autopilot, or we can't just kind of lay back and roll with the punches, so to speak. We got to be proactive. We got to actively, take part in the process to optimize our health, the things that are actually within our control. Because I think right now, for a lot of us, things are not totally in our control. We've had certain restrictions placed on us, on our families, whatever it is. And it's been a little weird. It's been a little different. And so I think we've all been affected, by this in one way or another, by the pandemic. And I know I certainly have been. And so let me just give you a couple of examples, of things that I'm sure most of us have been through recently. And I think one that's pretty easy to see is just our whole sort of normalcy, or our routines, if you will, have been kind of affected somewhat by the pandemic, right? Our normal get up, go to work, what have you, get the kids off and ready to school, our regular daily flow, our routine, a lot of this has been literally turned on its head, just totally upside down. And, many of us have been at home with our kids because they haven't been able to go to school, with our spouses because one or two of us haven't been able to go to work. Whatever it is, it's been totally a different, kind of scenario. And our routines, as ingrained as they may have been, a lot of them have changed a lot. And that in and of itself can can really, cause some stress and cause some challenges. I know those of us that have kids, we know our kids are big on routines and the proverbial, creatures of habit. And we as adults are too. We don't often like to admit it, but most of us benefit from having a standard routine as well. And, something so simple is like getting up in the morning at a certain time and then going to sleep at a certain time so we can have that optimal, 7-8 hour sleep window, consistently to be able to give us all those many health benefits, which it does. And then that's changed a lot. Most of us have been at home, and if we had the privilege to go to work from home, some of us have, been able to work early or late, and, we haven't had our typical, 8-hour block schedule or whatever that is. And maybe we've even been out of work, and so we've been at home and just had different challenges and issues, and maybe we've been, online more or watching Netflix, binge watching our favorite series and been up super late, and we've kind of, had these significant changes in our biological clock or our circadian rhythm, as we've talked about before. And I mean, no judgment at all here. I'll be honest. I've been susceptible to this, especially while my wife and kids were away. Even though I've been working and stuff, I've had some weird schedules with work because as you guys know, I'm an ER doctor, so I can work daytime, I can work nighttime, overnight, whatever. My sleep gets all jacked up, and and it's been weird. And I'll admit, here's an example. I rented a movie recently, and I was messed up. I put it on when I got home from work, just trying to get through this movie. It was like, a standard 2 or 2.5 hour movie. And, sometimes at the end of the day, we just want to kind of sit and veg for a few minutes, decompress. We've had a long, stressful day. So there's no judgment here at all about wanting to, have a few moments to yourself of quiet, maybe watch your favorite show on Netflix or whatever it is. And I did this for a couple of nights in a row, and I literally, it's kind of embarrassing. It took me a couple of nights to get through just one movie. I'd put it in, within 30, 40 minutes, I was asleep. And then I'd find myself in the middle of the night, like uncomfortable on the couch. And then I'd be like, crap, I got to get to bed because then I got to get up early and go to work. And it just kind of messed with me. I did this a couple nights in a row. It took me 3 nights to get through this one movie. And it's not because the movie sucked. I actually enjoyed the movie, but it just, with my sleep and my work, my circadian rhythm was all off. And this has affected me. These disruptions, whether we want to realize it or not, they're wreaking havoc on our bodies. We did a whole podcast on circadian rhythm and how important that is. One of the things that often comes up, and this is something I've seen a ton over my 20 years in medicine, is that literally one night's sleep disrupted, and a poor night's sleep, just one, can significantly impact our immune system in a negative way. Just one night can jack us up. And the converse of that is a good night's sleep, on the other side, can strengthen our immune system. So it goes both ways, which is cool, because we can have the power to strengthen our immune system with good solid sleep, or it can kind of go down the tubes because we didn't take good care of ourselves and get a good night's sleep. Here's an example. This is something I've actually experienced myself. Maybe you guys have. I've also seen it in thousands of people over the years. Let's say we have a big trip, planned, a vacation, whatever. We stay up super late the night before, packing, getting our stuff ready, getting our kids' stuff ready if we're taking our kids. Geez, my wife is like amazing at this. She can figure out how to pack for our 6 kids, for herself. She even sometimes tries to get my stuff packed, and I try to not let her because, I don't want to put anything else on her plate. And anyway, but often we'll be up late. The night before we travel, we won't sleep but, 1, 2, maybe 3 hours, and it jacks with us. It's not good. And often I'll see this in other people. They'll be coming out to Hawaii on a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and, they were up so late, prepping, getting their suitcases packed, getting all their work done so they don't have to bring work with them. And then honestly, they don't sleep at all coming out here, and maybe they get an hour or two on that, 5-6 hour plane flight. And then they get here, and within a day or two, they get sick. And then they spend the first half of their vacation sick. And this isn't just coincidence. This is science. This is physiology. If we don't get our appropriate sleep, our immune system, wanes. Just one night of poor sleep can basically make our chances of getting a viral illness, for example, so much higher. And so I've seen this in myself. I've gotten sick after traveling. I've seen many, many people get sick after traveling. Heck, right now, you definitely don't want to be traveling if you haven't had a good night's sleep, because there's stuff out there you don't want to catch, right? I mean, so get your sleep, get your appropriate rest, because if you do, your immune function will be so much better. We have these cells called natural killer cells. They're kind of the first line of defense, against infection. And they're kind of revved up and working, well, if we get appropriate sleep. And if we don't, the converse is true. From the Mayo Clinic, they've done studies looking specifically at this, and they have found exactly this, that after not getting adequate or quality sleep, we're just more likely to get sick if we're exposed to an illness like a virus, a common cold, or a coronavirus, whatever. And it can also affect how quickly you can recover if you do get sick. So why does this happen? I mean, when we sleep, our immune system releases certain proteins called cytokines. And these cytokines can actually help us. They help they're messengers. They can help us if there's any infection or inflammation. We need to have these messengers signaling to our cells to be able to go out and find the infection, to protect us, what have you. And sleep deprivation can decrease production of certain protective cytokines. Also, while we sleep, we have infection-fighting antibodies that are produced, right? We got the B cells making the antibodies, and these guys are especially active while we're resting, while we're sleeping. We've also learned in the Brain Health podcast recently that sort of the, optimal interval for our brain to sort of wash out all the toxins is at night. Those 7 or 8 hours that we're resting, we have this whole system, that's responsible for kind of cleaning and flushing all the toxins out of our brain, if you will. It's kind of like the lymph system in our body. We have an equivalent system in our brains, and it works while we're sleeping. So we need good sleep to be able to fight infectious disease. We need to be able to, have our immune system top notch, especially now. And we've talked about this before, 7 to 8 hours is optimal. One thing I brought up in my Circadian Rhythm podcast, which still kind of gets me, motivated to make sleep a priority, is that, 2007, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, they actually classified shift work, like what I do, like what many of us do if we got to stay up late for work or whatever. They classified this as a carcinogen. A what? A cancer-causing thing, right? They said classified the shift work with the circadian rhythm disruption, especially, guys that have to work, guys and gals working at night or whatever, as a likely human carcinogen. It's like, holy crap, man, my working overnight can cause me cancer? Like, oh my gosh, it's going to, I'm paying attention, to my sleep. And, right now I'm in the middle of this. I worked overnight last night. I slept a little bit during the day, and I got to work overnight again tonight. And so I'm trying to do my best to protect, my sleep. I've been actually sleeping up in my kids' room because they got an AC in there and some blackout curtains, which I don't have in my own room. And I've been trying to protect that because I know it's important. And this circadian rhythm that we've talked about is so important because when it gets messed up, when it gets disrupted, it puts us at risk, for many, many, many potential health conditions like obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, kidney disease, coronary artery disease or CAD, cancers of the breast, colon, lung, liver, also insomnia, things as well, like depression, anxiety, miscarriage, infertility. All of these can be affected by poor quality sleep. As we know, and this is something that I think most of us can appreciate because it's readily seen, but also sleep deprivation decreases our alertness and our performance to a significant degree. Maybe if we've been up all night and we're trying to just drive home like I do after my shift, we notice that we're not as hyper acute and focused as we'd like to be, and we may have the equivalent of driving drunk after not sleeping if we don't do things to protect our sleep, because our coordination is decreased, our alertness is decreased. And so I specifically not only do my best to still try to get my 7 to 8 hours when I'm working at night, but I also watch my supplement and dietary intake, and I have some clean energy drinks that I use to help me, to be focused and alert so that I can be safe on the road for me and for you guys that may be out there. There was an interesting study done on military folks a few years ago, and they basically tested them, with their target practice with a full night's sleep, and then, they successively decreased the amount of sleep that they were getting. And guess what? Big surprise. In a linear fashion, as they were sleep deprived, they got worse and worse at their target, shooting, and especially the speed at which they were able to respond. If they were able to basically take all the time they needed and just focus on hitting the target, even without as much sleep, they could do this okay. But if they were timed and they had to focus on speed, this was significantly impaired. Their reaction times, doing complex functioning, their ability to adapt, if the targets were moving, this was especially more difficult. And, when they did like the pop-up targets, if any of you guys have gone to the range and you got to do the ones that pop up like these, they kind of sucked at when they hadn't slept a good night's sleep. So it's well studied. It's well documented. We even have studies, I'll probably take some heat for this, but there's studies out there of physicians and their performance when they don't get adequate sleep. Fortunately, I don't have to work, in long periods, 24, 48 hours anymore. When I was in my training, often I had to work long shifts, 24, even 48-hour shifts and things like that. And now, fortunately, I'm mostly on an 8 to 12-hour rotation where I do get the opportunity to sleep between shifts, which is a great thing, because if we're up all night, especially days on end, our performance does wane. And they've done studies on surgeons, for example, doing laparoscopic surgery, and they didn't do them on real people. They did them on a simulator, and nowadays they got kick butt, simulators out there, just like they do with flight training. They got these things for laparoscopic surgery as well. And they found, guess what? That the sleep deprivation indeed impairs your performance. Okay. Typically, if you're up for 24 hours straight, they make this equivalent to a blood alcohol level of about 10%, which is in most countries above the legal driving limit. And so if you have a surgeon that's been up all night, have a little caution. Maybe if it's not an emergency, has to be done in the middle of the night of the surgery, maybe it could be, postponed until the morning. Maybe it would be better with having a procedure performed on somebody who's had a full night's sleep. If you have the choice. Sometimes you don't have the choice, but this is important, because performance definitely wanes if you haven't had appropriate sleep. And I think we can all attest to that. This is not rocket science. This is not something that we've never heard of, So many other things are tied into our sleep as well. And like I said, I'm talking about this because I know right now our schedules are jacked. They're not our normal routine. Often we're up late, either if we're working from home, trying to get stuff done. Once the kids have gotten to bed, finally, we have some quiet time to crank away on our work if we work from home. I know this is the case, with my wife often. I was without her and the kids for, 5 weeks or so, and I wasn't able to help. So she was doing late nights because we got 6 kids, man. No joke. Like in the daytime, they were supposed to be doing school, which she was trying to help them with, and, do all the usual stuff, getting 3 meals a day for these guys. And then she works full time too. So she was often up late and this is a challenge we've all had to go through, and I think it's really come to light even more recently with the quarantine issues and the whole pandemic thing, and it's not good. We need to do what we can to protect our sleep, because sleep does so much for us. It actually improves our cholesterol too, for example. I did a whole podcast on cholesterol, and one thing that it does is when we don't get good sleep, when we have less sleep and less quality sleep, our good cholesterol, or HDL, the one that transports the cholesterol back to the liver so it can be processed or broken down, that one goes down. And then our bad cholesterol, or actually our triglycerides, if you will, that number goes up. And remember, I sort of focused on how important it is to lower our triglycerides and to increase our HDL through exercise, proper diet, good fats, getting good sleep, because when we don't get good sleep, the opposite of what we want happens. The HDL goes down, the triglycerides go up. I think this was one of my problems, several years back, when I didn't really appreciate the value of sleep. I even admittedly used to say things like, oh, I'll sleep when I'm dead, kind of thing. And there were years on end where I averaged, like 4 hours of sleep. Years on end. And this was not good. I still looked healthy. I still maintained a good weight because I was super active. I ate a really good diet. But on the inside, I wasn't as healthy. Also, when you don't sleep appropriately, your level of inflammation in your body goes up. And also your insulin resistance goes up, which means your insulin sensitivity goes down, which is not good, So decreased sleep will cause increase in your inflammation. This thing, we can measure it. I actually had mine measured recently. It's called highly sensitive C-reactive protein, and it's a marker of inflammation. And it's a marker that's been shown to be correlated with your risk for developing heart disease or coronary artery disease. And we want this number basically as low as possible, right? Because we want to have the lowest level of inflammation possible. And if we're not getting good sleep, this number is going to creep up. And that's the case with me. Back in the day when I was getting these 4 hours of sleep, I had this thing measured and I was like, what the heck? Why is my inflammation up? Like, this is so weird. Like, I'm so healthy. I don't eat an inflammatory diet. I'm super active. And it's kind of dawned on me that one of the factors has been that back then I didn't protect my sleep, and so my inflammation was up. My insulin resistance was up. And this is documented even in myself. I've been getting fasting, blood sugar at least once a year, just for my insurance thing that many of you guys have to do as well, that your biometric screening that most of us have to do for work to kind of get a slight reduction on our health insurance. And I would look at this number, and I hadn't eaten anything, since the night prior, and my fasting glucose would be, kind of borderline. It might be in the 90s. And anything over 100 for a fasting blood glucose is considered, fairly abnormal, like even pre-diabetes level. And I'm like, what the heck? I think one time I actually did get to 100 or above 100, and it just made no sense to me at the time. I hadn't really been studying this. I hadn't really been focusing on it, but I immediately just thought, well, what's up with my diet? I'm like, I don't even hardly eat sugar. I eat healthy stuff. Like, what's the deal? Is the test wrong? And actually what I think it was is that I was not getting appropriate sleep. 4 hours of sleep ain't good, and it's especially not good years on end, and I've learned that it can be a carcinogen. So I now have been doing my best to get my 7 or 8 hours to protect my sleep, because I've noticed that not only do my numbers improve, my cholesterol profile has improved, my insulin sensitivity measured by my fasting glucose is way better because I'm getting appropriate sleep. Remember all the things I mentioned earlier on, like that in shift workers we're prone to: heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, all these things. If we have our circadian rhythms messed up, our sleep cycle messed up, well, it's true. It's all true. Who would have thought, right? Like this silly thing that we call sleep. Besides the obvious crap, like I mentioned about our dexterity, our alertness, all that kind of stuff is obvious. It can make us kind of foggy and not clear. It can make us grumpy, right? I know my wife will attest to this greatly. When I was doing years on end of 4 hours of sleep, like I was kind of a grouch, especially after about 8 p.m. I was not fun to be around, and that's why, sleep messes with you. It messes with your mood. It messes with your attention, alertness, cognition, all of that stuff. Also, it can play a role in our ability to consolidate our memories, especially if you're having to study for a test or this and that, like those all-nighters. I don't know if you guys had that experience in school. I did it, I think once I did an all-nighter, and I sucked afterwards. Like it didn't work for me. And I didn't know all this sleep science back then, but here's why. We weren't made to be up all night and have to, perform at the highest level. Like, it's important to get significant sleep. 7-8 hours. It's important, right? Super important. A lot of other things, lack of sleep. It can kill your sex drive. It can put you at increased risk of having messed up hormonal levels. It decreases your testosterone levels. For you dudes out there, you want to get strong and pumped, and if you're not sleeping good, man, that's working against you. Like I mentioned before, depression is increased if we don't get good sleep. Anxiety is increased. Insomnia, of course, is increased. And so these things all kind of compound and sort of feed on one another, right? So we got to be careful. We got to protect our sleep. Here's a cool one that I found fascinating. And this is something that I think all of us innately know. If somebody's been up a few nights and they kind of get those dark circles under their eyes, they get a little puffy. We kind of see it, but we just don't really think about how it's associated with lack of sleep. It's actually been proven both on a molecular level. As I mentioned before, inflammation goes up when we don't sleep well. Also, they've done these dermatologic studies, which are super interesting. They take pictures of a bunch of people that are well rested and people that haven't gotten a good night's sleep. And as little as one night, you can note it in their skin. Like if you handed these photos to somebody who didn't know whether they got sleep or not, and you asked them to pick, or asked them to pick which one looked older or what have you, they would most often pick those that hadn't had good sleep. They were a little puffier, their skin lines seemed deeper, the circles under their eyes, and it's shown both on, a tangible level that we can see with our eyes, but also on a molecular level. And that's not good. We don't want our inflammation to go up. It also is shown up with our collagen gets messed up, when we don't sleep adequately, because when we don't sleep appropriately, our cortisol, which is our negative, stress hormone, that goes up, right? And if we got too much cortisol running around, it can actually break down our collagen, which we need, right? This is the protein that keeps our skin youthful, elastic, and smooth and healthy looking. In the future, I hope to do a podcast specifically on collagen, because it's something that I've, fortunately come to appreciate more as, I'm getting close to 50. I'm getting more lines than I used to have, and I probably spend too much time in the sun, and that's part of it. And I've noticed the utility of collagen. Collagen is important, and I've recently, in the last probably 1 or 2 years, started to supplement, and it's really helped, not only with my skin, but with my joints, and my bones and connective tissues and stuff. So I hope to dedicate, a full podcast to collagen coming up, because it's super fascinating. Another thing that I think we often appreciate with sleep is that if we don't get good sleep, I've mentioned this briefly, it can make us more forgetful. The area of the brain that I talked about recently, called the hippocampus and the neocortex, where the long-term memories are stored, this is affected greatly by decreased sleep. So we have actually trouble establishing memories, which is not good, right? This is some of the first signs of some of these dementias, is our ability to lay down new memories. And sleep deprivation can heighten our risk of these things. So let's be proactive. Let's try to get our sleep. Also, many of us know, especially I am very familiar with this in shift workers, it can make us more prone to gaining weight when we don't get appropriate sleep. Because when we don't sleep, our hormones get messed up. We have sort of the two contradictory hormones in our body, ghrelin and leptin. they work oppositely. Basically, ghrelin is the one that stimulates hunger, and leptin is the one that signals satiety. We've talked about this before with vitamin D, right? When we have low vitamin D levels, our leptin, which is the satiety hormone, doesn't work well. And so often you get your vitamin D right and you lose weight. Same thing with sleep. When you don't sleep appropriately, it messes with our leptin, and we don't get that satiety signal because our ghrelin is a little bit ramped up more than we need to. And so we get, have you guys ever been up all night and had like the so-called late night munchies? Well, I see that almost every single night that I work. And in fact, you know, it's a little embarrassing, but in the ER, we have like a little kind of quote unquote junk drawer that has snacks and candy bars and things like that because people get the munchies at night, you know, and that's because of these hormones. Ghrelin is hyperactive. That's the one that tells us to be hungry and want to eat. And the leptin, which tells us to be full, that one is blocked. It's not, you know, working appropriately when we don't get good sleep. So it can make us gain weight. Also, we've talked about this before in the gut health podcast, right? That our circadian rhythm is also reflected in our gut health. Like our microbiomes, those several trillion guys and gals and bacteria, you know, bacteria and viruses and so on that live with us, on us, and among us, within us, these guys are affected by circadian rhythm too. And so if we're not getting good sleep, they're messed up as well, and they can often be a big factor in gaining weight and having difficulty losing weight. So dang, there's a lot of stuff out there that messes with our sleep. Anyway, we've done tons on sleep, and I wasn't even really planning to, but it's fun and it's exciting. And I know recently there's a lot of changes that we've been susceptible to lately because our sleep has been jacked up. Another thing that I found during this time of the quarantine and pandemic is our diets have been messed up. I think we've turned a lot to these kind of comfort foods and the easy foods. I know I've been to the grocery store a whole bunch of times, and the stuff that's been gone on the shelves is not the fresh produce, right? It's all the stuff in cans and the cereals, you know, all the processed garbage that's out there. That stuff is the stuff that's been, you know, empty on the store shelves because we've been turning to these kind of comfort food measures during the lockdown, during this pandemic and quarantine and all that, and that's not good. You know, not only are we messing with our immune system because we're not getting appropriate sleep, but we're messing with our bodies with a poor diet, and it's just like the perfect recipe for disaster for our health, right? You know, most of you have probably heard of this thing called BPA, right? It's a chemical found in sometimes food because of the plastic that things are packaged in. Even, I didn't really realize this a few years back, but even canned food, because they line the inside of the can with basically something that's kind of like on the plastic spectrum there that keeps the can from rusting, so to speak. And often it's BPA on the inside of these cans. You know, bisphenol A or bisphenol A is what BPA is, and it's a chemical that's added to the packaging of food, oftentimes, also certain hygiene products. And it's something that's been around since the 1890s. It's been out there, you know, 100 plus years. In the 1950s, I think we started to use it more and more because we found that it helps to produce a good, strong, resilient plastic. And these plastics are used a lot in food containers, right? So much of our food is packaged in plastic, you know, a lot of the drinks, even water, you know, and so you got to be careful if there's BPA in there or not, because this can mess with you too, okay? Like I said, the lining of a lot of canned goods has BPA used in those resins there, which keep the cans from corroding, especially here in Hawaii, man. Everything rusts around here. So anything that you eat that's packaged in plastic, even canned stuff, toiletries, feminine products, you know, those receipts at the grocery stores from the thermal printers, all these things can have BPA in them, and they can mess with you. And often you got to pay attention because a lot of these products, they'll realize people have gotten savvy to this, and so they'll say, oh, ours is BPA free. Well, a lot of times they just replace that with sort of cousin chemical called BPS or BPF. And those are probably no better. So just, you know, read the labels on stuff. Try to avoid packaged foods because not only are all the chemicals used in the processing and the artificial things, the sweeteners that we've talked about before. Are they not good for us? But the BPA is not good for us either because it messes with our hormones. Many of us have heard about this before, but it can actually bind to estrogen receptors in the body, and it can influence all different processes, such as cellular growth, cellular repair, fetal development, energy levels, reproductive health. It can interact with other hormone receptors as well, like our thyroid hormone receptors. It can mess with that. And so there's a lot that is there, and it's probably a whole podcast in and of itself, so I don't want to get too down that rabbit hole right now, but just pay attention. Pay attention to your diet. Pay attention to the foods that you eat. If they're packaged in plastics that may contain, BPA, try to minimize that exposure. Try to stay away from canned goods as much as you can, no pun intended. If you can, drink from a glass bottle. If you're going to microwave something, if you have to reheat, try to reheat it in glass. All these things can minimize your BPA exposure. So just pay attention to that, and pay attention to those so-called comfort foods, because they're probably the worst thing out there for our health. And that's one thing that has significantly increased. And the data shows this. It's not just me going to the supermarket and noticing that these shelves are all empty, but the sales from companies like Kraft and Prego and Campbell's and General Mills, that make all these comfort foods and processed foods, their sales have gone way up during the quarantine. And we know that poor diet is probably the single most important risk factor in developing chronic disease. Things like obesity, diabetes, prediabetes, heart disease, hypertension, all these ailments that are often preventable and directly related to diet. Holy moly. And when is this so important as now, when we realize that with coronavirus in particular, that having these ailments, these so-called comorbidities, right? These health ailments like blood sugar imbalances, insulin resistance, diabetes, prediabetes, heart disease, hypertension, having these things, which are in large part caused by a poor diet, will increase our risk of getting really, really sick from any virus out there, and also coronavirus, right? We know that, something like 90% of the people who've died from coronavirus had some type of chronic health condition. This is the real deal. We need to pay attention to this stuff. And this goes for flu too. This is just not unique to coronavirus, but most of the viral illnesses prey upon those with, chronic disease, in the sense that they don't do as well. So it's something that we got to pay attention to. We literally have to pay attention to. And so the other thing I just wanted to mention in closing too, that's probably the third big thing I've noticed in this whole time of quarantine, of pandemic, is that a lot of us, besides our circadian rhythms being off, our diet being messed up, and our activity levels have been hindered because of quarantine issues, right? They shut down a lot of the natural spaces, the parks, the beaches in a lot of places. Thank goodness here in Hawaii, they didn't shut the beaches down completely. They let you at least go for some exercise. They didn't let you picnic on the beach or hang out or whatever, but they let, me, for example, go surf. You could go for a walk on the beach during most of the time. I think they did limit that for a time, but these limitations were also wreaking havoc on our health, right? We need activity. I did a whole podcast on activity, on exercise, and all the myriad, tons and tons of benefits that we've had. It's been so interesting, the stuff that's come from our governmental leadership, right? This triad of the things that we should be doing to not get sick or whatever. It's like wear a mask, self-distance and quarantine, and wash your hands. I don't disagree that some of these things are certainly valuable, but they've, I think, missed the, path as far as nobody was encouraging us to do things to actually get us healthy, because literally we had 3 and sometimes 4 months to be able to focus on our health, but the powers that be were making it extra hard for us to do so, right? They were closing all the gyms. They were closing the natural spaces outside. How does that ever make sense? Why should the parks, places you could go for a hike and get your exercise, get your vitamin D. Like, why should these places be closed? It makes no sense at all. There's no data to back it. And I'm just going to go out there and say it, like, this was a stupid decision for the most part, because people weren't getting their exercise. And then their health and immune function suffers when we don't get our exercise, we don't get our vitamin D. It's the perfect storm for getting sick. Staying indoors, eating a crap diet, having our sleep cycles all jacked up because we're binge watching, Netflix, or we're having to work at all hours because our kids are home. Whatever it is, like, it's a perfect storm to mess with our health. And yet we weren't being told what we could do to improve our health. Like, it was so messed up. I mean, that's why I like to get this information out there. We can do stuff. We can exercise. Those of us that had been quarantined at home, including myself and my family, we did lots of stuff at home or close by for exercise. I even bought a weight bench and free weights, which I never like to do that. I just like to surf and do sort of activity-related exercise. And I couldn't do a lot of those things. So I got a weight bench, I got free weights. And, you saw my wife online doing all these home workouts and stuff like that. Like, there are things we could do. And the data shows that it's super hard to actually get viruses, and in specific, to get coronavirus outside. It's actually really hard to get it. You see these guys wearing masks outside, like, while they're going for a walk. Like, that doesn't make any sense at all. Why would you do that? Number one, you're not in a big giant group of people going for a walk, at least not typically, and so you're not around other people. And your breathing is, affected. And when you're wearing these masks, you shouldn't have to wear a mask while you work out. Like, this is kind of crazy. And the ultraviolet light, right, the sunshine that's out there, this actually kills the virus. It actually kills it. In fact, in the hospital, many of you maybe don't know this, but we use ultraviolet light to basically, sterilize, quote unquote, our equipment, like things like my stethoscope and things like that. I put them in the ultraviolet light for a few minutes after every shift to kill all the virus particles that may be there. And so ultraviolet light from the sun, which we get outside, actually kills the coronavirus and many other viruses. Besides, it increases our vitamin D, which is super helpful, right? We talked about this before, how when we can get our vitamin D levels up, will also significantly enhance and improve our immune health, right? There's big studies out there on many viruses, including flu, and now we have data on coronavirus that shows if we can get our vitamin D levels above 30, hopefully even higher than that, 40 or 50, but if we can get them above 30, our likelihood of getting sick or really sick or even dying of any virus, and specifically coronavirus, is a lot less if our vitamin D levels is up. We also know that exercise in and of itself increases the activity of our immune system. It increases the activity of these natural killer cells, the ones that are sort of our front line of defense. We've talked about that before. What's also interesting, and this is not something that was shared on a lot of the media, but most of the new cases that have been coming up, in New York over the last month or so, when they ask people what they've been up to, have they been out and about doing stuff, or have they been sheltering in place? And more than 70% of the new hospitalizations that came in, folks that were sick enough to be hospitalized in New York City, more than 70% of these patients, of these people, were actually indoors, sheltering in place, doing the stuff that they were told to do. And they were getting sick. I've talked about this before. In the wintertime, when we're in close quarters, if we live in an apartment building, if we're stuck inside and we can't get out, we can't get our vitamin D, we can't get our exercise, we're more prone to viruses. And the viruses themselves tend to live longer indoors, right? They can be on fomites, things like door handles, the elevator buttons and things like that in New York, those things are everywhere, and if you live in a big building with a bunch of other people and one person is sick and they're moving around and touching stuff, I mean, crap, that can increase your risk. And this was shown, right? Even those people that were staying home and trying to abide by those, shelter-in-place orders, they were 70% of the new hospitalizations in New York City. They weren't the ones that were trying to get out and get active and stuff like that. And so sedentary lifestyle, staying indoors, all these things mess with your ability to have optimal immune health. And so I haven't been in agreement with this restricting access to public areas like parks and beaches and places where people can go out for a walk or a hike or a run or whatever, because we need to get out. We need to get out. It's healthy for us to get out. Not to mention, the mental health benefits, the brain health benefits of being outside, getting sunlight, getting vitamin D, getting our receptors in the back of our eyes to sense the natural light, right? We talked about this a whole podcast, the interesting photoreceptors in the back of our retina that signal our brain that, hey, it's daytime, it's light outside. This activity, being outdoors, being able to see the sunlight and things like that, that is actually helpful not only for our immune system, but for our brain health, for our mood, right? We've all heard of things like seasonal depression. Well, it's a real thing. It happens because we're often not able to get the natural light. And one of the things that nobody really wants to talk about, and here I can say it, I think with full confidence, that in Hawaii, thank goodness we haven't had very many deaths from coronavirus. But what's sad is we have had more deaths from other issues directly related to coronavirus, like mental health, brain health issues, deaths of despair, which is kind of the tagline for how a lot of times these have been referred to recently. These are the suicides, the homicides, the deaths of despair that have occurred due to being locked up, so to speak, in quarantine or sheltering in place, or losing your job, having your world turned upside down and not having that optimal mental health, brain health. We here in Hawaii have seen more deaths by suicide than we've had from coronavirus. That's a fact. I think in many places, I believe that's true in California and other places as well. I've talked to healthcare professionals throughout the country who have also seen significant increased risk and spikes of, suicides and despair. We see this a lot because we're a safety net in the ER, and a lot of our patients that have come in have had significant, mental health, brain health issues during this stressful time. And this hasn't been talked about a lot, and it kind of pisses me off because this is important. This is reality, and this is happening. And so getting out and doing things to be proactive for ourselves, for our mind, our bodies, our brain health, our mental health, this is so important. And the powers that be have kind of gotten this wrong. They haven't paid attention to this, and they're still not really talking about it. And it's really annoying because I'm on the front lines and I see this stuff, and I've seen spikes and suicides right here in Hawaii. Young people that have been in despair and desperate. They've lost work. They can't feed their families, and it's, oh my gosh, it breaks my heart. And so it's true. It's out there. It's happening. But there is something we can do. We can pay attention. We can, use our voice. We can share the importance of optimizing our mental health, our brain health, of getting out and getting exercise, getting appropriate sleep, good nutrition. These 3 things that I've really focused on in this podcast, because these things have been kind of turned upside down on us. And I don't think that it was done on purpose. I don't think that the government had any malice. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but they didn't get it right. They weren't doing the right things to really help us optimize our immune health. And they weren't even giving us the information, because the truth of the fact is we can optimize our immune health in days, not weeks, months, years, but literally in days, by doing important, simple things like getting good rest, having appropriate diet, avoiding, these processed foods and things. We can actually affect our immune health nearly immediately, within days. So there are things we can do. So get pumped about that. Get excited about that. You're not without recourse. There are things you can do, even within the walls of your own homes. There are things you can do. It's just been really hard to see these deaths of despair, the spikes in domestic violence, these things that have all gone up significantly during the pandemic. And I don't think that even now we're talking about this enough, and it just breaks my heart. And I am witnessing it in the hospital, in the ER where I work. I've seen it affect friends and family of mine, and it's heartbreaking. But as mentioned, the good news is we can make a difference here. We can be proactive. There's so much that is within our power, and that is why I'm talking about it right here, because it's personal. It's affected me, my family. It's affected so many that I've seen through my work, through my listening to others, and just seeing what's been out there. We can make a difference. We can make a change. We can focus on our sleep hygiene, on our diet, putting the whole natural good things into our bodies, not comfort foods that are full of artificial sweeteners or just processed stuff and just the high fructose corn syrup and that kind of garbage that's in there that just jacks with our inflammation, our insulin sensitivity, and it just makes us more prone to get sick. Like, there's a lot we can do. We can go out and we can get exercise, even if it's within our own home. There's tons of home workouts we can do. My wife is genius at this. I've seen her literally run laps around our house and do interval training and lift weights and all this kind of stuff. And it pumps me up because I'm not that creative. If I'm not getting out and getting my surfing in or whatever, or my hike up the hill before, it was hard for me to get my normal exercise. And I can tell you honestly that this impacted me. My mood was down. I was having some despair of my own because of lack of normal, regular routine, both in my sleep, both in my exercise regime. And I had all of this stuff affect me too on a personal level. And what I've seen is that as I've paid attention to it, it's amazing what 30 minutes out in the sun doing a little walk can do for your body. Not just physically, but mentally. It's amazing. For your soul, it's good for you. So anyway, guys, I just want you to know that I love you. It's so empowering to know that there are things that we can do. Don't get bogged down too much in all these things of the pandemic and negative effects, because why? Let's focus on the positive of the things we can do, the things we can influence, that we can affect, because we need to be our best selves for us, for our families, those that rely on us, for those out there that look to us as role models, for those that are watching, because what I've learned as a parent and being out in the community and as a physician, people are watching. We need to be that source of light, of inspiration, of goodness. And I really believe that's within us, that we can do it. It's something that each and every one of us have the ability to be able to be out there to affect change, positivity. It's well within our reach. We can do this. We can do this together. So please, please, please share this if you found anything of utility, of value. I just want us to have some tools, some things we can really get out there and do to be able to positively affect our lives, our health, our minds, our souls, our bodies, our emotions, because we can do this and we can do it together. So until next time, guys, a big aloha.